Ever feel like you're bombarded with information? Like you're trying to wrap your head around something complex, say, the influence of these big corporations, but every news article and social media post pulling you in different directions. And that's what led you here, right? You've been wrestling with hefty research on how these multinational giants impact everything from the media we consume to international trade agreements and the ripple effects on the environment, even democracy itself. So think of this as like a crash course.
A deep dive into corporate power. One of the things that immediately jumped out from the research was this stat. It's almost unbelievable. A shockingly small number of corporations control this massive chunk, a considerable part, of the global media landscape. Yeah, and the interesting thing about this is this ownership concentration can lead to homogenized content. Imagine walking into 5 grocery stores, right? You'd expect variety, but they all only sell the same brand of cereal. Media is similar. We encounter the same narratives and viewpoints repeated across different outlets, and often those dissenting voices, other perspectives that might challenge those narratives, get stifled.
So it's like that feeling you get when you're flipping through the channels, and it's the same story, different anchor.
Exactly. And this isn't just some abstract idea, The research gets into specifics and points to climate change coverage as a prime example. They highlight how media outlets, especially those influenced by corporate interests, often downplay the severe climate crisis. And that has this domino effect on public awareness and our collective action or inaction.
So they're controlling the narrative, right? And because of that, they control how we understand the
issue. Precisely. They influence how we perceive the problem, shaping how we respond, if we even respond.
And it's not just about what they choose to leave out. This research also calls out those blatant misinformation campaigns, especially the ones, you guessed it, orchestrated by the fossil fuel industry. Can you show us how these campaigns work and what they're trying to do?
Unfortunately, they're incredibly strategic and often very effective. These campaigns pour a ton of resources into creating doubt, even when the science is crystal clear. And their goal? To sow confusion among the public, delay any policy change that might affect their bottom line. Ultimately, it's about protecting their interests, even if it means putting the entire planet at risk.
So it's unsettling when you see how corporations can shape the information we're exposed to daily. But get this, their influence doesn't stop there. We've got to understand how these dynamics worm their way into international trade agreements, and frankly, it's a rabbit hole.
Well, it is. We hear about these trade agreements constantly, but most people only see the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, on the surface, they sound straightforward. I don't know. Countries agree to play nice and make trading more effortless, and they want to reduce those tariffs, all in the name of global economic harmony. But the research that you shared paints a much different picture. All these almost stealthy provisions are tucked away in the fine print, giving corporations a surprising amount of power over national policies. It's kind of like, okay, we'll sign on this dotted line, this trade agreement, but if you try to pass any environmental regulations, they affect our bottom line, we're taking you to court. That kind of power.
Yeah, and that's where things get interesting, and by interesting, I mean terrifying. You start digging into these agreements and run into things like the Investor-State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, or more commonly known, ISDS.
ISDS? Sounds like something straight out of like a law textbook.
It is a mouthful, but it's important to understanding how this system works. So, in the simplest terms, ISDS lets corporations sue governments if they think that a policy, say a new environmental regulation, will hurt their profits.
Wow.
So picture it. A company sues a government because they don't like an environmental law. They think it's cutting their profits. That's the power dynamic that we're talking about here.
It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, but it's happening right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, is there any specific example from your research that shows how this ISDS mechanism has been used to work against environmental protections?
Yes, there is. This one case stands out. It involved a mining company, and they used ISDS to challenge a specific country's decision to protect a UNESCO World Heritage Site from environmental damage. The company argued that the government's decision violated the terms of a trade agreement they had signed, and ultimately, they walked away with a huge settlement.
Wow.
And the environment? Well, it was left vulnerable. That case highlights the chilling effect that ISDS can have on governments considering enacting stronger environmental regulations. It's like this sword of Damocles hanging over their heads.
It's a stark reminder that the fight for environmental protection and, all the complexities of global trade, they're intertwined. And often corporate interests are right there behind the curtain, pulling the strings. So we've gone down this rabbit hole of media manipulation and peeked behind the curtain of these trade agreements. This raises the question, how does all this corporate influence, this unseen hand, affect, the fabric of democracy itself?
That is the million-dollar question. When corporations have this much influence over the information we see, the policies that shape our lives, it can start to feel like, maybe they're drowning out the voices of everyday citizens. The real worry is that we end up with policies that put profits over people. And that's a slippery slope for any democracy.
Absolutely. The research gets into the nitty-gritty here and highlights concrete examples. Remember those terms we hear sometimes? Lobbying, the revolving door between corporations and governments, is not just these abstract ideas. They're mechanisms of influence.
Oh, absolutely. Lobbying at its core is about corporations using their resources, and often they have vast resources to influence policy decisions and make them go in their favor. And then you've got this revolving door phenomenon. We see it all the time. Former government officials end up in high-paying positions in the industries they used to regulate.
Talk about a conflict of interest.
Exactly. It just blurs the lines. The lines between corporate interests and public service. It also raises questions about who these entities are serving. It risks creating an environment, a system, where the people in power are more beholden to these corporations than those they were elected to represent.
It can feel, a little disheartening, like we're up against this massive, intricate machine. But here's the fact, the research doesn't leave us with this sense of doom and gloom. It offers hope, There are some solutions and ways we can push back against this concentration of power.
Right, it's definitely not a lost cause, not at all. The research emphasizes media reform, for example, breaking up those media monopolies and creating more space for independent journalism. By diversifying who owns and controls the media, we can hopefully create a media landscape that's more diverse and more representative of everyone.
It also explains how we need to re-examine these trade agreements and put them under a microscope. We must ensure they focus on the environment, labor rights, and human rights, not just corporate profits.
Yeah, and we can't forget about the power of transparency. Shining a light on all these lobbying efforts, these campaign contributions, those cozy relationships between corporations and government officials. That's how we hold everyone accountable.
This deep dive has been quite a ride. Corporate power touches many parts of our lives, often in ways we don't even realize. But the real question, the one we all need to think about, is this. Knowing what we know now, how can we as individuals, as citizens, become more discerning about the media we consume? How can we be more active in our democracies? That's something worth thinking about and acting on. Thanks for joining us for this important exploration.